I think you need to charge for this podcast. There's a lot of information here. The only thing that's going to keep people who are listening to this podcast from being a $1 billion information trader is going to be...
Some people call you the Doogie Howser of real estate. You sell off the Emerald Coast. You coined the Hamptons of the South. You actually sold over 1 billion before the age of 30, and now you're well over 2 billion now, and you're selling several hundred million per year. Now, what would I need to know about you earlier in life and the dominoes that had to fall to build who you are today?
I think the rejection of my peers was the first red flag. Rejection was such a driver.
Put a chip on your shoulder?
Dude, oh my God, it wasn't a chip, it was a chunk. I mean, even to this day, like if somebody says, Jonathan, you can't do something, all of those things are drivers. And I think for each of us have a driver inside of you. So the first thing I tell you is that prospecting creates revenue, because relationships that you build through prospecting is ultimately what your revenue stream will be. So I always tell my agents that they need to focus on 3 different buckets. Those buckets include
Some people call you the Doogie Howser of real estate. You sell off the Emerald Coast. You coined the Hamptons of the South, and you actually sold over 1 billion before the age of 30, and now you're well over 2 billion now, and you're selling several hundred million per year. Now, a lot of people look at that and they see you at the kind of like this pedestal, like you're on top of the mountain. But I kind of see life as kind of these set of dominoes that need to fall for us to get where we are today. So what would I need to know about you earlier in life and the dominoes that had to fall to build who you are today?
I think that's really a great question, because we all start somewhere, right? Whether we look at a career and we go, we sold 20 million or we sold 2 billion, right? We had to put one foot forward. And I think as salespeople, a lot of us get so frustrated. I know I do as well. I just wrapped up a leadership meeting where I'm looking at my team production, and my team today has 17 agents, and we basically run a small brokerage within Compass. And I want to always go from step 1 to the top of the stairs in one giant leap. And the funny thing about that is that's part of what makes me great, right? The ambition, but the fortitude and the love for the process is what allows me to achieve, as opposed to the goals that I set forth and the time that I want to spend on those goals. So I started kind of at an early age. I was 14 years old when I made my first major prospecting call. And that was a call to the dean of our local college. And it was a community college. And I just said, hey, and Andrew, you're from Florida. You live in Tampa now. In Florida, we have a program for high schoolers to achieve a college degree, at least their associate's degree, prior to completing high school. And so I called the dean of the college. I said, look, I'm 14. I'm already homeschooled. I'd like to start taking college courses. Is that possible? And, the way that I was able to substantiate that at the time is I had already skipped ahead 2 grades in homeschool. The reality is I had just started homeschooling like that semester. But they allowed me to take college courses. And I say all this because I was driven to get a degree very quickly, not knowing the direction of my life, but being just naturally entrepreneurial and almost having this kind of fire in my gut, like I got to get started. And this came at the heels of an interesting time, because prior to that, I spent most of my life as an extremely overweight child. I would say I was definitely obese. I mean, at the age of 10, I was probably 250 pounds. So you have to think I'm probably a foot shorter than I am now. I'm 6 foot now. But I always had this kind of weight struggle. And that was, interesting, because I thought it was a curse. I'd wake up every day and I'd just fight my body. And as I got a little older and I learned how to manage this curse, I realized that my life needed to have discipline if I wanted to create and reach certain goals. And so part of that was the discipline of how am I going to shed this extra weight that's killing me at this point. I was 12, 13 years old, still going on 250 pounds. I mean, it's a lot. It's a
Wow.
lot of weight for that frame. And so I lost 100 pounds between the ages of 13 and 14. And it was almost like I woke up one day. I was sitting in my house, and I remember this. I was watching like some television show, and they had all these beautiful girls, and I was thinking to myself, like, I'm never going to be able to attract somebody like that looking like this. It was like this moment of conviction. And for me, I use that. We can talk about the psychoanalysis of how healthy or unhealthy that was, but I use that as a drive, right? It became a goal in my mind for why I needed to change what I was doing each day. And I didn't wake up the next day and go run 10 miles and, restrict calories and do all these quick and some would say efficient ways to lose weight. I changed my lifestyle literally. I incorporated movement on a daily basis. I changed my diet from processed foods to whole foods, and I watched my body change. It didn't happen overnight, but it certainly happened over time. And within 12 months, I was drastically different, to the point where people would come up to me and they'd be like, "Are you the same person? Are you that same guy? Like, really?" And that was also motivating for me. If you've ever looked into, like words of encouragement or, areas of your life that you may gravitate more towards. Some people gravitate towards gifts.
Yeah.
And they really do it for them, or words of encouragement, or physical touch. Like, there's all kinds of different love languages. Mine was definitely words of encouragement. And when somebody recognized that I had achieved something, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, like, what happened?" That put a fire in it. It just added fuel to the flame. And
Nice.
so through that process, I learned discipline. I learned my capacity as a human being, and I also learned how to continue momentum. And we're going to dig into what that really means, and why that's important for us as entrepreneurs. But being able to carry that kind of highly disciplined and restrictive schedule from a 13-year-old in middle school to a 14-year-old who was ambitious and really wanted to use this newfound fire to go after other goals outside of just weight loss. I was able to say, listen, I want to start college early. I already kind of grew up socially awkward because of my weight. I just didn't fit in class. I didn't fit in school. And that allowed me to make an almost awkward transition to college, because in college, you've got, especially at a community college, you have people in your class that are 14, maybe, like I was, or you've got, 65. And so it put me in an interesting category where I had to learn to get along with people that were much, much older than me, which we're going to bookmark that as well, because coming into the real estate industry, like, we have to lead people, especially if you're young. Right now I'm 32, and we have to lead people that aren't our age, and we have to learn how do we create parallels, how do we create connection, how do we get along with maybe somebody that's different than you. They think differently, they act differently, they manage their money differently. All these little nuances, they teach us something. And so for me, the discipline of weight loss, going to college early, learning how to connect with people that are of multiple generations, that prepared me really, really well for the eventual career that I'd have in real estate.
Yeah, and we'll get into like you getting into real estate, and that I kind of want to double click for a second on. I think there's a couple things. Like, one, when you go through like a health journey and you learn kind of like the discipline between eating healthy, like moving, like getting more active, you start to learn like the simplicity around it in a way, and it really teaches you a discipline at another level. And I kind of want to touch on that, but I think there's something to be said that why did you even know to like change at that young of an age to make like for me, for example, when I was it took me into my 20s and I looked at myself in the mirror and I kind of remember this day like very vividly. I was back at my parents' house looking at myself in the mirror and I was just like completely and like utterly disgusted and had just kind of reached that breaking point.
Tell us what you really thought, Andrew.
So I was
No,
just curious for you, like, was there
yeah.
like a certain point or was there like a moment that you kind of remember?
Yeah, I mean, I think the rejection of my peers was the first red flag where people were just like, "Oof, this guy's he doesn't look like me. I don't know. I mean, he's kind of strange." That that rejection was such a driver, and it's
Put a chip
interesting
on
to
your
think.
shoulder?
Yeah, dude. Oh my God, it wasn't a chip; it was a chunk. It was a chunk off my shoulder. And I mean, even to this day, like if somebody says, Jonathan, you can't do something, I'm like, hold my 32-ounce water canister because I'm about to do it. So all of those things are drivers. And I think for each of us, whoever is listening to this call, you have a driver inside of you that is, it's that voice that it's something just doesn't sit right. When somebody tells me, hey, you can't do that, or even like today, somebody will say, John, you should just be a producer. It's what you're really good at. Forget about the business landscape and growing other businesses. Like, just stick to what you're good at. Like, that's not me. And what I found at an early age is that headwinds and pressure is what really produces the diamond. It's what really produces, a result that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And what it also taught me is I could find more capacity in my life to grow. And I could figure out, okay, Jonathan, what is it that I have inside of me to pull out, to mine? And when you think about mining, it's like, okay, we're digging, we're digging, we're digging. You really do have to fall in love with that process of digging into yourself and self auditing and self examining and taking rejection in a positive manner to use the energy, the negativity that most people feel from rejection to turn yourself around. And I always say, like, cruise ships don't turn around on a dime, right? They're big, big, big machines, and they take time to move around. You have to be willing to be okay with that time. Let me say one more thing about time. The fastest things in nature, the things that move the fastest, right? Where maybe you'd see an immediate change are storms that brew and weeds that grow. They're the fastest things in nature. And when we try to mimic our life as a salesperson, we start at step one and we look at the top of the staircase and go, I've got to get to that top right now. There's no incubation. There's no time needed. I just need to go from here to there. Just remember the foundation with which that thought comes from is either going to brew a storm in your life or you're going to grow like a weed. The quality is compromised. And truly, like, the self-fulfillment of what you think you're going to get out of step one to the top of the staircase isn't there. And I learned that at a young age by going through this weight loss journey. Not only did I learn that then, but I'm still learning that today. I mean, my health routine today has to be just as disciplined as it was at the age of 14. In fact, at
Yeah.
32, at almost double the age, like, it's got to be more disciplined because our metabolism's slow and our bodies change as we age. And so, I think in my business, when I look back at like $2 billion in sales, how was that achieved? It wasn't by accident and it wasn't overnight.
And talking about that, like you didn't start in like the ultra luxury space, but you are there now. You
Yeah,
started uh can you talk about that kind of journey into that and how you got into that?
absolutely. So, no, I did not start in luxury, but I will tell you that my natural disposition as a child was mom and dad take me out to dinner. They put a menu in front of me, and I go, I want the steak. I want the lobster. Bring me the caviar. And my parents are like, what? I don't know what caviar is. How do you know what caviar is? Like, I didn't grow up necessarily in like a luxurious environment from a familial standpoint, but I always gravitated to luxury goods, even advertising. Like I remember I'd pick up a magazine, and at the time it was like the Ritz Carlton had these beautiful magazines, and I would fall in love with the artistry of luxury. And so when I started my career, I thought it would be just a stepping stone, right? Like I went to get a real estate license on the day I turned 18. So I spent my whole 18th birthday working on that real estate license and really trying to figure out how can I fast track this, right? I'm still in the mindset of step one to top of the staircase. And what I realized along the way is that, oh shoot, this is going to take time. And so as soon as I got a license, it was February of 2010. And in February of 2010, I was, fresh, 18 years old. And I didn't realize that we were about to have the biggest natural disaster in what I would say is the history of the panhandle of Florida, which was the BP Gulf oil spill, which had a live cam for any of you guys that remember of oil pumping out into the Gulf of Mexico, which the Gulf of Mexico, even for you in Tampa, it's one of the greatest natural resources in our country. And for us on the panhandle, the northern part of Florida, it's where we get this beautiful emerald green water and crystal white sand. And to think that we'd have oil on our beaches, environmental hazards, and just this idea that, not only are we trying to get out of the Great Recession of 2008, which we were still kind of in the middle of, but now we have something else to contend with. So I got licensed and I started my career during that storm. And when I look back at that, it was almost like somebody starting a career in real estate with every odd being against them. But what ended up happening is that every complicated scenario that you could imagine, I would have to learn in a very short amount of time. So instead of getting into the business and going and being an assistant for a luxury real estate agent, I got in the business and I went to be an assistant for somebody who was basically a foreclosure factory. And what this taught me was how to do a high volume of transactions and being able to manage a system and a process to create business. And a lot of us on the call today, like we may be running our businesses like they're hobbies as opposed to running our business like we're entrepreneurs and true business owners. I always tell my team, it's like, would you go and stick your money in the bank if the head of the bank, the president of the bank, was just kind of nonchalant about what they do, and they, their hours were flexible. Some days they show up at 8 o'clock in the morning. Some days they show up at 10. Like there's no process.
Yeah.
Most of you would run for the hills because that wouldn't work and your money's not safe. But for us as real estate salespeople, that's how we approach our business. Oftentimes we just wake up when we want to, and like nobody's telling us what to do. And that could be more than just real estate sales. That could be sales in general, whether I'm selling Cutco knives like you did, Andrew, or medical devices. But what I learned by working at this quote unquote foreclosure factory, and I call it a factory tongue in cheek, but it was an assembly line to transact for banks, which was the only inventory that was really transacting in our market at the time. I learned how to have a process. And I was able to kind of translate that from foreclosures to kind of the luxury home sales. And the way that I did it is I focused on the stray luxury foreclosure that would kind of come through our doors. And not only was I learning a market swath that was very wide, having grown up in the area was helpful, but being able to understand real estate values and growing up somewhere are two totally different things. And doing broker price opinions for banks were really fantastic knowledge, because I was tasked with pulling the data that would help an asset manager decide how much they were going to sell a particular asset for on behalf of the bank. And so when I get this stray luxury foreclosure, it would require me to do a lot of research on the property, understand the comps. And what that taught me is I would filter my hot sheet every day from top to bottom. And so I'd look at everything that was active, pending, sold, starting with the highest active, pending, or sold property down to the lowest. And I would memorize that multiple times a day. To this day, I tell my team, like, become obsessed with the hot sheet, because that is the heartbeat of the market. And so that's really, like, in a very granular nutshell, how I went from kind of foreclosures to serving on the luxury side was I gravitated towards luxury. And what I like to tell my team is where you gravitate is what you'll cultivate. And so from just a macro lens, it's like if I'm really excited to work with military home buyers, I'm going to gravitate towards their community. I'm going to figure out how can I insert myself in every possible position to serve that demographic because I'm passionate about it and I want to help those guys. And so it's the same thing at any corner of the market. Whatever corner you decide to go after, you have to be passionate about, and you absolutely have to be obsessed with it to the point where you're spending time in the market. You're spending time in those specific communities, the restaurants, the coffee shops, and you're able to articulate it at the highest level. So when you position yourself with an opportunity, you can capitalize on it.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because, what you said earlier, my dad in our wedding speech, uh, he said Andrew always liked the finer things in life. So it's kind of like very like similar in that way. Like when I was selling Cutco, I don't want to just sell Cutco like in any neighborhood. I was like, okay, where in Tampa can I go? There's Avila, there's South Tampa. Let me get
Yeah.
into. I didn't go to the private schools here, but I was trying to sell to like Berkeley, like all those places, and I was just prospecting in. So when you look at the things that like you did, what what are some things that like an agent can do or should do, like the different activities or
Yeah.
how they should spend their day to align themselves, or what worked for you?
So the first thing I tell you is that prospecting creates revenue because relationships that you build through prospecting is ultimately what your revenue stream will be. So I always tell my agents that they need to focus on three different buckets. Those buckets include your current clients, which most people like, they'll put a deal under contract and they may step out. They throw in a transaction coordinator and they have the title company or the settlement attorney get on it and, kind of take their client from there. You always want to be prospecting your current clients. You also always want to be adding to your sphere of influence. So current clients at the end of their deal, they go into the sphere of influence. You always want to be prospecting that SOI. And then the third bucket that's probably the least exercised muscle in this business and the most impactful one to exercise is your cold bucket. And so current clients, SOI, and then cold prospecting. And cold prospecting, it's like taking a cold plunge, right? Nobody wants to do it beforehand. But afterwards, especially once you've sat in, an ice cold bath for 3 minutes, you feel euphoric and, you're fired up and likely you got a great result. Cold calling in particular allows you to exercise a muscle that, 90% of the rest of the market's not exercising, maybe even 99%. And why don't they exercise it is because they don't need to. It's hard. It's difficult. And I hear a lot of like feedback from agents oftentimes on cold prospecting is like, well, I don't want to bug people. And I'm like, well, prospecting somebody cold isn't about bugging them. It's about finding value that you can provide to somebody that you've never met. And that comes with being an expert in your market, right? You have to understand the market data, understand why you would be positioned to call somebody that you've never talked to before and offer them value that they wouldn't have otherwise. One of the best ways to do this is by creating a network of agents in your market, whether you're on an amazing team where you can leverage their brand, or you're a single agent that in your farm market you're talking to the most active agents that are doing the business. You want to understand what are the buyer and seller needs of that market. Because with buyer and seller needs, you get half of a puzzle piece that you can put together with another puzzle piece. And so by getting a buyer need, somebody may say, hey, I need a 4-bedroom home under $1 million in X neighborhood. Well, if that doesn't exist, that gives you a real purpose to pick up the phone and call in that neighborhood and find a potential seller that didn't know that that buyer was there, right? Like Zillow doesn't say, here's how many buyers are out there for, a 4-bedroom home under $1 million in X neighborhood. Like it just doesn't. So you are now positioned with proprietary information and value that you can offer somebody that would have never had it otherwise. And so those are really simple and very effective ways to build an entire business and ultimately become what I call the mayor of a market.
So that's an example. Like if we bucket that strategy, it's like we have a buyer strategy. Like can reach out to any homeowner and be like, hey, this is kind of what they're looking for. This is why we reached out, et cetera, et cetera. When we look at a strategy like that, do you have a handful of those that you use to come across with value? Because the biggest thing that people ask is like, well, what do I say when I reach out? So is there like a couple that you use, or is that kind of like the big one?
There's a couple, but I'm going to tweak what you're saying just a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not about what you say as much as it is about how you say it. Let me give you an example. If you get a phone call from Jonathan Spears and he goes, "Hey, this is Jonathan. I work at Spears Group. I have a buyer that may be interested in your home. They're looking up to 5 million. Would you be interested in selling?" They may go,
Click.
"Hello, you sound like a dead man on the other line." Or you call them and you say, "Hey, this is Jonathan. I'm with Spears Group. I walk by your house every single day. And literally the shutter color that you guys chose, I had to color match it at Benjamin Moore because I was so obsessed with it. My wife, we just love your house. And so I have a question for you. I've got a buyer that's looking for something very similar to yours. And when I told them about this beautiful home that I walk past every day with these gorgeous shutters, they started getting really excited. And so I wanted to reach out and just see if you might be interested in selling or if you guys have ever thought about exchanging that home for something different in the neighborhood. So that does one of two things. One, you cold prospect a potential buyer because you're asking them, would you ever exchange something like what you have for maybe something larger, for something smaller? So you're getting a potential buyer lead out of that.
Yeah.
Or you're finding out if somebody's a seller. And so you're getting two sides of the coin. And so I always say, listen, imagine a market like a puzzle that is all blank. It's just an all white puzzle, or pick your color, and you start coloring in the shades of information, right? That seller is going to give me information. He may say, "I'm never selling. This is a legacy property. I'm leaving this to my kids." And you know what you can say? "I completely understand. And listen, I'm going to continue to walk by this house and I'm going to ooh and ah over it. And if I ever see you out there, I'd love to shake your hand and say hello." And they may go, "Well, great. We'll be in town in whatever week. Would love to see you." And then that boom, that's an open door for you to get a face to face connection. So at the end of the day with these cold calls, you truly want to get face to face, because the secret sauce in every cold call isn't always the information you're giving them. It's you as an advisor, as somebody who can help them navigate the market, because you're the one that's always staying in touch with what's happening in the market. And the market moves. What happened yesterday isn't what's happening today. And that's also not what's going to happen tomorrow. So you're wanting to position yourself to be that valuable resource for a prospective customer in your corner market.
So a few questions off that. One, uh, is cold calling kind of like the main medium that you use? And then two, you're busy, you have a lot of clients. So are you making all the cold calls, or do you have a system or any leverage?
So those are all great questions. Number one, when I tell you SOI, past client, or excuse me, SOI, which are typically your past clients or your sphere of influence in general, it could even be your favorite barista at the coffee shop. You want to be in that bucket 33% of the time. Your current clients, you want to be always courting roughly 33% of the time, which means that SOI should be producing active sales. And then number three, you want to be in that cold call bucket about 30% of the time. This allows you to be even in your business. And what that also does is it takes out these highs and lows of unpredictable and predictable. Because what tends to happen is you'll make a couple cold calls, you'll get a couple clients, you'll put some deals under contract, and then you'll forget that you made a couple cold phone calls to get to that point of being under
Yeah.
contract with those clients. And then once those deals close, you're like, "Oh my God, I got to go back to making cold calls again, because that's what got me here in the first place." And then once you start making those cold calls, you forget about the clients that you've already served because you're too busy trying to get the next hot lead on the phone. It creates a cycle of unpredictable business and truly being a hobbyist versus being an advisor and a real estate professional. As far as cold calls go, though, for us, like my business is heavy SOI. I've made a lot of phone calls, and most of the time I've called developers in particular. So I'm looking for people who transact multiple times in the market, which I found very effective. To this day, I pick up the phone and I will call developers that I do not know, or I'll use resources that Spears Group's provided, which could be PR efforts or notable sales, to try to get myself in front of the part of the market that I need to, including a very cold part of the market. I started sort of this kind of uh, cold SOI current back when I was in my foreclosure days. And I was able to kind of take that all the way through the very top end of the market. So my very first sale in real estate was $90,000, which was pretty much the lowest end of our market. It was a home that needed to be remodeled. It was a foreclosure, and the people buying it were primary residents. So they were literally spending the most money that they've ever spent in their lives on this $90,000 house. To go from that area of the market to like last year, we sold a home that we developed for $19 million, which was the highest sale in our market, is a significant jump.
Yeah.
But I promise the process that I had on that $90,000 house was very, very similar to the process that I had at the $19 million house. The only difference, the biggest variable, was the who that I was talking to. And so along the way, I didn't jump from 90,000 to 19 million and go, I'm too good to go back there. But I consciously gravitated towards the area of the market that I thought I could serve best. For some people on this call, it may be the $1 to $3 million market, which truly, if I had, $33 million houses, it's a lot better than maybe having one $90 million listing, right?
Yeah.
Because that $33 million deal is going to transact a lot more frequently than one $90 million house. So I say all this because you want to be very calculated in how you corner a market. And you also want to approach it with a level of reality that's like, okay, we're not going from step one to the top of the staircase. We're going to go one step at a time. And along the way, we're going to take the things that we've learned and we're going to get smarter. We're going to adapt and we're going to get better. And we're going to continue to try to serve our client at the highest level.
So you have nearly half your business come from new construction developers. So you've found your way of getting in there. I was curious when it comes to them, because when I worked with the builder, like there's realtors reaching out all the time, like, hey, can I have your listing? Hey, we would love to list your homes. And it's like working inside the builder, I saw like that immediately turns them away. Like your chance of like trying to get even like face-to-face time with them is gone. Like if your first reach out is like, hey, I want your listing.
You know how a builder is going to pay attention to you?
How?
There's only one thing. It's results.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, especially developers, they care about results and they care about the frequency of those results. And so when I first started working with probably the biggest developer in our market, I had already created results, but they weren't really results that they cared about that much. They only cared about their properties transacting.
Mm-hmm.
And so the amount of passion I had when I made that first phone call to that builder was not only authentic, but I was able to articulate their product in a way that they really didn't hear very often. Now, did that give me an exclusive listing with them? Absolutely not. But what did get me exclusive listings with them is I brought buyers to their inventory at a high frequency. So I created results more frequent than anybody else they were seeing. That created the success and the trust and the continued success in general with not only that developer's inventory, but developers across our counties that we serve. And I think that, go ahead.
Quick question to double click on that. How did you bring that developer a lot of buyers? Did you specifically like do anything for that, or was it?
Do you want to know the best way to infiltrate a market is simply to listen. You ask questions and you listen. So the way that I brought this developer a lot of business is I would ask questions from other agents in the market. Because knowing that the best thing about a developer is they usually have inventory in progress. So you want to pay attention to this inventory in progress because that inventory in progress is unrealized potential in that market. And when you have unrealized potential in the market, you have a pocket listing. It may not be an exclusive listing, but it's something that you know that somebody's intent on selling. And so when you come across a buyer that could fit the need of that listing and you're able to pair them together before it ever hits the market, you're creating results and you're also creating urgency, because then now that developer's product is in demand before anybody else even knows about it. And then by the time somebody else hears about it, they feel like they're behind. You start doing this on a continuous loop, you're going to get all the developer business you can handle, because you're able to create results for somebody that maybe they were seeing them before, but they certainly weren't seeing them at that frequency and at that high level.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, if I can take everything, like your time in the foreclosure business, you prospecting, kind of like the we have a buyer approach, you with the developer, you are almost doing all of these things hand in hand. You're
Correct.
reaching out to homeowners, you're reaching out to developers, you're reaching out to buyers, and you're building lists of people.
We're reaching out to agents. So I think the biggest thing now, when we're in what I would call a low sales velocity market, meaning the number of transactions happening today at every price point are lower than what was happening a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, kind of this post pandemic. I don't want to call it a downfall, but it's certainly a post pandemic market. And in a post pandemic market, I need to know every rock that's turning in the market, meaning every single buyer that's potentially coming in the market to look. I need to know what they're looking at and who is looking at it. I tell our agents, technology does not tell the story of a market. So you can get on Zillow, you can get on Realtor.com, you can get on any website that you want. You can have AI create the fanciest algorithm you've ever seen to give you data for you to try to interpret the why behind buyers purchasing. But when you're the person transacting, or when you're close to a transaction, or let's just say it's a good friend of yours in real estate that transacts who will give you the story, you can put these pieces together and create a narrative of value for both a seller and a buyer that may be transacting there. The why would somebody spend $1 million more for a house next door? A seller's baffled by it. Well, why? Zillow says they spent this on that. Why? Like, nothing can tell you other than an amazing advisor. I always position myself to be the why guy. And that's what led to monumental success, because I could create so much value by articulating the stories of why transactions are happening in the market, which directly led to market value for a specific buyer or seller.
So you're learning the product inside and out, you're learning the market inside and out, you're being able to convey that. And then when you have all of these, like, were you marketing in like this list almost that you were creating, or is it just kind of like the right person at the right time, like, hey, here's this opportunity, we have this list of potential sellers, for example? Or I guess what I'm trying to convey is, it seems like you create this list of potential sellers in a way, and you have this list of buyers, and you kind of almost create this mini marketplace between the two.
I created markets. I mean, truly, like, we would create the market. And if I wasn't creating the market, then I wasn't doing my job well. So I couldn't serve everybody everywhere. And let me warn everybody on this call, do not cast your net too wide. This may sound like a macro conversation. I'm highly micro. Like, if you were to go look at my listings right now today, this is my 15th year of my career. Most of my listings are north of $10 million. Why? And you know how many? There's very few that will even transact this year north of $10 million. Why am I serving that part of the market? Because I became an expert at it. And I'm one of the very few people in the world that could ever articulate what's going on in this market and beyond north of $10 million. But I had to get to that point. I had to get to the point of understanding what is the market reward at this part of the market. And this is for anybody. It doesn't have to be 10 million plus. Let's say you're, again, $1 to $3 million, which I love this price point. I'm trying to get my team to just like drill down on $1 to $3 million deals because they're so frequent.
Yep.
What does the market reward between 1 and 3 million? That would be the very first question I ask myself. And how would I know the answer to that question? I would simply look at the hot sheet and I would see what is selling. I would see what, and then I'd pick up the phone. I'd call agents and be like, hey, Billy, what's going on between 1 and 3? I see you're selling like 5 or 6 of these things a month. Why are people buying these listings? And real estate agents love to tell you about what they did right. They love to be like, oh my God, I got that record sale because, this house had beautiful floors. And I've noticed that these buyers that are coming through, they love this flooring, or they love this designer, or they love this paint color, or they love this location. Whatever that is, people trade on information. And if you're the one that understands the information and the whys to why things are transacting in the market, you're going to be extraordinarily valuable and effective at helping people achieve their goals.
The billion-dollar information trader.
I think you need to charge for this podcast. There's a lot of information here. The only thing that's going to keep people who are listening to this podcast from being a billion-dollar information trader or a multi-million-dollar information trader is going to be executing on what we're talking about, taking action. Because it's real easy to sit here and listen to a podcast and be like, okay, Jonathan does this, Jonathan does that, or Andrew does this, and Andrew does that. But what am I going to do? So take just 2 or 3 of these nuggets from this call and start implementing them every single day, consistently. And guess what? When you plant a seed like that, you start implementing new actions every single day, that seed's not going to sprout into anything. You're going to look at the ground and go, well, shoot, I planted a seed. I'm putting water on it, but where's the stem? Where's the green? I'm not seeing anything yet. You have to continue doing it over and over and over and over until you see the result. And that's where falling in love with the process is so key. And I'm so thankful that I had to do that at an early age, because I could look back at that and go, God, that was my curse. But really, that was my blessing. And so today I'm able to see the fruits of that labor, multifold, because I can look back and say, I truly fell in love with the process. And I'm able to ride out the process to see a result.
Yeah. And there's so much going from a high performing salesperson to a high performing leader. There's a lot to talk about there. But I did want to kind of ask you, you were selling real estate at a high volume, at a high level, at a young age.
Yeah.
And for example, me being 29 years old, just getting married this past year, kind of thanks. Kids are in the conversation. What was it like when you had your first kid and making that transition and finding that work-life balance, let's call it, quote unquote, even though I see it more as Tony Robbins says it and other people too, work-life integration. But what are your thoughts?
Man, I love this topic. We could do a whole podcast on this topic. Your children and your family can either become an excuse for why you can't do things, or they can become a motivator for why you can. Let me explain. When I was 25, I found out I was having my first child. And by this time, I had already become top agent in the market for multiple years, top single agent, first person to break 100 million in the market, all these wonderful things. And I thought I was somebody, right? And then I find out, oh my gosh, I'm about to have my first child, and it's my daughter, Ella. And so elated. I've got an amazing spouse. My wife, Julie, is definitely my rock. But I realized shoot, I'm waking up, I'm getting to the office at 8 a.m. and I'm coming home at 8 o'clock at night. That's probably not going to work with a newborn.
Yeah.
And so as salespeople, especially for those of us who've kind of reached the top, right? We feel okay, we've got a good thing going. We've got tailwind. We're rocking and rolling here. To try to get you to adapt from that schedule and that high level of production is extraordinarily difficult, because a lot of times we're afraid to delegate, and we're afraid to say, okay, I can't do all of this by myself. And I would say my superpower during that time frame is I knew I wanted to be a great dad, even more than I wanted to be a great business person. And so what do I need to do to adapt to try to achieve greatness in both of those categories? And that was hiring and finding the right people to surround myself with. So that way I could only focus on what was important for me to do during certain hours of the day. And so I call that figuring out your capacity. And I always challenge my team. I tell them, listen, don't throw more hours at a problem. Figure out with the hours that you already have, how can you efficiently solve that problem? If your problem's production, maybe you need to be on phone calls for 15 minutes or less instead of you spending an hour talking about your grandmother to your favorite client, which I know that's valuable time, but this is not what you need to be spending your time on. And so it's this self audit of how am I spending my time? And I think kids, for you, Andrew, you're going to realize this when you guys do have kids, they're like the best thing ever because they come into your world and they're the last thing that you can predict. You don't know if your baby's going to sleep, if they're not going to sleep. You don't know, what kind of challenges you may have. And so it compresses your time in a way that only parents on this call can probably relate to. And so with that compression of time, I had to adapt because I wasn't going to achieve this goal of being a great father and still maintaining and growing an incredible business without figuring out how could I delegate certain tasks to other people. And it all started with me hiring an assistant. So I got one assistant and then I got an agent that could work buyers for me because I realized that showings were consuming so much time. And then I figured I needed two buyers agents. And then that's where I grew and I learned to trust others. And then, you get to this point where you realize, okay, who are the right people? What are the right seats in my business? Like, do I need a CEO? Do I need a COO? Do I need an executive assistant? What are those things? What are those hinge points that are going to allow me to get to the next level without just throwing time at things? Time is the easiest resource to throw at things. And then sometimes throwing money and trying to waste time is the same, trap that you can get caught in. But finding those quality people that grow your business in a way that you couldn't do yourself, even if you had the time to throw at it, that's the master's level education. And that's a lot of what I've walked through in the latter stages of my career.
What's your thoughts on, because obviously you can't, I shouldn't say you can't, it's hard to be at everything with everyone. The quality versus quantity conversation, like when you look at your family, you look at your business and
Yeah.
like weighing that. I'm just curious your thoughts.
I would say when you look into the quantity side of things, it's always who, not how. And so reading that book, there's a book, Who Not How. It's phenomenal. It's really every entrepreneur should read that book. But when you create goals, instead of saying how can I do this goal, you'd say who can help me achieve this goal, and then how can I clarify my vision so well that those people buy into it. I always remember this amazing quote from Richard Branson. He goes, listen, I've grown Virgin, Galactic. I've grown all these amazing businesses that are so pie in the sky outside of the box. And the only way I did it is I had a vision I could clarify so well that I could sell the best people on the planet on executing that vision with me. And so that's my goal as Spears Group is I bring on agents where me as the leader, I can clarify my vision and our goals as a team, and we can achieve great things together. And learning that it's not all about me was probably having my first kid was that first wake up call. And Andrew, I know getting married, that's a wake up call. Oh shoot, there's two people in this house. It's not just about
Yeah.
me. But truly, like together, you guys can accomplish greater things than you by yourself. And so that's this whole mentality of a team approach is like, we get to work with people that are brighter in a lot of areas than I am. And we're able to sharpen each other. And I wouldn't have opened my mindset up to that if I would have been a heavy micromanager and just said, oh, it's all about me. I got to keep it all right here. And so I'd encourage anybody on this call, you want to go to the next level? It's who, not how. Figure out the who's in your life that you can align yourself with that will help take you to the goals that you have. Don't just throw time at it. That's going to keep you in a cycle of rat race.
Yeah, just that like title of the book is like it's the epitome of building a team.
Yeah.
So if people want more, where should they go follow you?
Best place is on Instagram. at Jonathan M. Spears or at Spears Group. And I look forward to connecting with you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out directly.
Nice. So I have a kind of, let's call it semi-selfish, but like semi-curious. You're very strategic. You're intentional. Like you're smart. You don't have to be spending your time doing these podcasts. But for the past couple of years, from the research that I've seen, you've done a handful and a lot of them.
Yeah.
How come?
You never know who you'll end up influencing by hopping on a podcast like this. The amount of connections I've made from people who've reached out and said, Jonathan, you changed our business. Jonathan, just this little nugget. I mean, it truly it permeated in a different way. This is how you build a brand. And so for me, like our brand is centered around the success that we've had, the success that I want to share. And I always believe that like approaching your business with an open hand, being collaborative and having a willingness to share and connect with others is the best way to build. And so that's why I'm here with you today. And like now I've got a new friend in Tampa, right?
Yeah.
I'm super excited. And if I need some really good Cutco knives, I also know who to call.
Yeah, I can tell you which ones to get.
Love it.
Tell you where to buy in Tampa too, even though I'm not a real estate agent.
I love that too.
So, last question. What's in your ear right now? Like, what is something that like you're absolutely obsessed with, or like in your mind, like something that like is just you're spending it in an inordinate amount of time, just like focus on it, or like hearing it, or listening to it, or whatever.
This is going to sound really simple, but my current obsession is all about auditing myself on a deeper level. And so what that means is I audit my nutrition. I've got a nutritionist. I plan every single meal in my kitchen. I don't deviate from that. And I'm watching the slow and pretty incredible results. In the last 12 weeks, I went from 18% body fat to 13% body fat, doing zero cardio, which I used to think I had to do cardio like crazy just to fit my jeans.
Yeah.
Um, just these little things. I mean, not just in this, that's just in myself, but in my household, right? My wife and I are auditing how are we talking to each other? What type of entertainment are we allowing in our house? What are we putting in our minds? From a business standpoint, who are the people that I'm aligning myself with? Do they still meet the ideal agent and the ideal team member that Spears Group needs to grow and to grow in the right way? And so auditing my time, my schedule, my nutrition, all these things, they become somewhat of an obsession because I know that if I can get those fundamentals right, I'm going to get to the point that I want to be from a goal setting standpoint.
Well, I want to thank you for leading by example and just being a leader at all levels within the industry and being a wealth of knowledge and sharing that with others. So, thank you.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.